I'm Jessica Morgan, 32, and 3 days before Christmas, my hands trembled as I listened to my father's voicemail. Christmas is OFF. Expect a call from my lawyer. Standing in the mall surrounded by holiday shoppers, I felt strangely calm. After years of emotional manipulation and financial control, something inside me had finally snapped. I texted back one word: understood. Little did he know I was about to give myself the greatest gift of all: freedom. Before I tell you how I turned my father's threat into the best decision of my life, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and subscribe for more stories about breaking free from toxic family patterns. My father, William Morgan, wasn't always wealthy. He grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Boston, the son of a factory worker and a seamstress. Through a combination of genuine business acumen, relentless work ethic, and what my Aunt Grace once called a frightening ability to identify and exploit weakness, he built a successful chain of medical supply companies across New England. By the time I was 10, we had moved to a sprawling colonial in Wellesley with a 3-car garage and a swimming pool that no one used because Dad thought it was wasteful to heat it. Money in our house was simultaneously everything and nothing. It was everything in the sense that it dictated every decision, every conversation, every milestone. It was nothing in the sense that we were never allowed to speak about it directly. Dad controlled the family finances with an iron grip, dispensing funds like a king granting favors to loyal subjects. My mother, Rachel, had no access to their accounts beyond a household credit card that Dad reviewed line by line each month. "Your father works very hard for what we have," Mom would say whenever I questioned this arrangement during my teenage years. Her voice always carried that slight tremor, the one that appeared whenever she was repeating Dad's mantras rather than expressing her own thoughts. We should be grateful. Before she married my father, my mother had been an art teacher with her own apartment and a group of friends who went to gallery openings and poetry readings. Old photos showed her with flowing hair and bright patterned dresses. The woman who raised me wore neutral-colored pantsuits and kept her hair in a neat bob that required minimal maintenance. She'd given up teaching when I was born at my father's insistence. "A Morgan wife doesn't work for pennies," he'd told her, as if he'd been conferring a privilege rather than removing her independence. My younger brother Ethan had it both better and worse than me. Better because as the only son, he received a certain type of approval that always eluded me. Worse because Dad saw him as an extension of himself, a vessel into which he could pour all his expectations and ambitions. At 28, Ethan still lived at home and worked as a vice president at Dad's company, a position created specifically for him despite his business degree from a mid-tier state college that Dad had openly described as disappointing. "Jess, I can't just leave," Ethan told me during one of our rare private conversations last year. "Where would I go? What would I do? My entire resume is Dad." I'd fought my own battles for independence, starting with my choice to attend UCLA rather than Boston University, where Dad had connections. "California," he'd bellowed when I announced my decision. "What possible reason could you have to go across the country when there are perfectly good schools here?" The reason, which I didn't articulate then, was precisely the 3,000 miles that would separate us. Dad had threatened to withhold tuition, but Mom had intervened in one of her rare acts of defiance. I later learned she'd gone to her parents for help, and they'd agreed to cover what my scholarships didn't. Dad eventually relented, unwilling to let family friends know he wasn't supporting his daughter's education, but he made sure I paid in other ways. Every holiday, every birthday call included some variation of, "I hope that expensive California education is proving worthwhile." After graduation, I'd taken a marketing job in San Francisco, ignoring Dad's offers to set me up properly in Boston. Over the next decade, I built my career carefully, moving from company to company, securing promotions and raises, until I reached my current position as marketing director for a sustainable clothing brand. Each step had been accompanied by Dad's dismissive commentary, Marketing? That's just making people want things they don't need. Sustainable fashion? That's a fad, Jessica. The mortgage situation began 3 years ago. Dad had found a lake house in New Hampshire, a 4-bedroom property with a private dock and mountain views. This will be our family gathering place, he'd announced during Christmas dinner. A place for holidays, summers, future grandchildren. He looked pointedly at me when he mentioned grandchildren, though I was single at the time. The thing is, he'd continued, swirling his scotch, the bank needs a co-signer with excellent credit. Your mother and I have too many properties already. This wasn't exactly true. Dad had just leveraged several of his properties for a business expansion. Jessica, you barely use your credit. It would be a simple favor. What exactly would I be signing? I'd asked. Just some paperwork. You won't be responsible for anything, he'd assured me. I should have known better. The some paperwork turned out to be co-signing a $380,000 mortgage. Dad had structured it so that my name was on both the mortgage and the deed, which he presented as generosity. See? It's partly yours. Your inheritance someday. What he didn't say, but what became abundantly clear, was that this arrangement gave him a new lever of control. Whenever I missed a family event or disagreed with him, he would casually mention taking me off the deed, but keeping me on the mortgage. The threat was clear. I would have all of the financial responsibility and none of the benefits. For 3 years, I'd walked the tightrope, balancing my growing independence with enough compliance to avoid his financial wrath. Until now. The breaking point had been building for months. In September, I'd received a substantial promotion, becoming the youngest marketing director in my company's history. The accompanying raise meant I was finally earning enough to feel secure, to build my own safety net. I called my parents to share the news. Director? That sounds impressive, Mom had said, genuine pride in her voice. Dad had cut in immediately. What's the salary? Those California titles are always inflated. When I declined to share my exact compensation, he'd scoffed. Well, I suppose it's fine for now. You can always come work for me when you're ready for a real executive position. The first major crack appeared at Thanksgiving. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't fly home for the holiday. My friend Amber had invited me to join her family in Lake Tahoe, and after years of tense family dinners where Dad interrogated me about my career and dating life, the prospect of a relaxed weekend in the mountains was irresistible. You're choosing strangers over family for Thanksgiving? Dad had demanded when I called to inform them of my plans. They're not strangers, Dad. I've known Amber since college. College friends aren't family, Jessica. Family shows up. Family prioritizes family. I'll be home for Christmas, I'd promised, already dreading it. The tension escalated further when, during a FaceTime call in early December, Mom noticed the man's jacket hanging on my coat rack. Are you seeing someone? She'd asked, her voice brightening. I hadn't planned to tell them about Marcus yet. We'd been dating for 4 months, and he was the first man in years I could envision a future with. Marcus worked as an environmental engineer, was kind, thoughtful, and came from a warm, functional family that had already welcomed me at their weekly Sunday dinners. Yes, I admitted. His name is Marcus Wilson. We've been together since August. Dad had immediately commandeered Mom's phone. Wilson? Is he the son of James Wilson from Wilson Construction? No, his parents are Diane and Robert. His mom's a pediatrician and his dad teaches high school physics. Dad's disappointment had been palpable. Will we be meeting this Marcus at Christmas? I'd hesitated. I wasn't planning to bring him this year. It's still relatively new. Nonsense. If he's important enough for you to mention, he should join us. I'd like to know what kind of man my daughter is involved with. The interrogation that followed was invasive. Where did Marcus go to school? What was his salary? Did he have investment properties? What were his career ambitions? With each question, I felt my anger rising. Dad, I'm not subjecting Marcus to an inquisition. If he comes for Christmas someday, it will be as my guest, not your interview subject. Don't be dramatic, Jessica. I'm showing interest in your life. No, you're assessing his net worth and connections. Watch your tone. Remember that lake house deed still has my name on it too. There it was again, the implicit threat. But this time, it didn't frighten me. Instead, it clarified everything. I need to go, Dad. I have plans tonight. The final confrontation happened 2 days later. Dad called as I was leaving work. Your mother is planning Christmas dinner. She needs to know about dietary restrictions for your friend. I already told you, Marcus isn't coming this year. This is ridiculous, Jessica. Christmas is family time. If he's important to you, he should be there. The way you're acting is exactly why he isn't coming. And what way is that? His voice had taken on the dangerous quiet tone I knew too well. Controlling. Judgmental. You don't want to meet Marcus. You want to evaluate whether he meets your standards. As your father, I have every right to assess the men you bring home. I'm 32. Dad, not 16. I don't need your approval. As long as your name is on my properties, you do. Something in me snapped. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. This family has traditions. Respect matters. Your brother understands that. Ethan lives in your house and works at your company. Of course he understands. That's enough, Jessica. Either you bring this boyfriend for Christmas so we can properly meet him, or don't bother coming at all. For the first time in my life, I didn't back down. If those are my only options, then I won't be there. He'd hung up without another word. The voicemail came 20 minutes later as I was driving home. I didn't listen to it until I'd parked and was walking through the mall to pick up a gift for Marcus. Jessica, this is your father. As if I wouldn't recognize his voice. Your behavior today was unacceptable. Christmas is canceled as far as you're concerned. Don't bother coming home. Expect a call from my lawyer about the lake house situation. I won't have an ungrateful daughter's name on my property. I stood frozen between a pretzel stand and a jewelry store, holiday shoppers streaming around me. My hands trembled slightly, but not from fear. From certainty. This was it, the moment I'd been both dreading and waiting for. The ultimatum that would finally set me free. I texted back a single word, understood. The morning after receiving my father's voicemail, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. This wasn't a crisis I could handle between meetings and conference calls. I needed focus, clarity, and professional advice. My first call was to Stephanie Lynn, a lawyer I'd met through a women's business networking event last year. She specialized in real estate and family law, a combination that suddenly seemed providential. I can see you at 11, she said after I briefly explained my situation. Bring all the paperwork you have related to the property. I spent the next hour digging through my files, finding the mortgage documents, property tax statements, and the deed I'd signed 3 years ago. Each page bore witness to my naive trust, my willingness to entangle myself financially with a man who viewed money as a control mechanism. Stephanie's office was in a converted Victorian in Nob Hill, all bay windows and ornate moldings outside, sleek modern furniture within. She listened without interruption as I explained the full situation, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. So to summarize, she said when I finished, you co-signed a mortgage for a property that's in both your and your father's names. He's threatening to remove you from the deed, but leave you on the mortgage, essentially making you liable for a loan on a property you wouldn't own. Is that correct? Yes, I confirmed. Is that even legal? It's complicated, but not impossible. What most people don't realize is that the mortgage and the deed are separate legal instruments. She tapped her pen against the papers I'd brought. However, there's something your father seems to have overlooked. What's that? As a co-owner on the deed, you have rights too, including the right to remove yourself from the mortgage without his permission. I sat straighter. I can do that? There's a process called mortgage assumption. Essentially, one party takes full responsibility for the loan, removing the other party. Since your father is threatening legal action anyway, you could preemptively remove yourself from both the mortgage and the deed. So I'd give up any claim to the property? Yes, but you'd also be free of the financial obligation. Based on what you've told me about your father's behavior, I'm guessing the property was never really meant to be yours anyway. The truth of her words hit me hard. The lake house had never been my inheritance. It had been a collar and leash. What do I need to do? I asked. Stephanie outlined the process. I would need to file paperwork with the county clerk's office where the property was located, formally relinquishing my interest in the property and requesting removal from the mortgage. The bank would then contact my father to either assume the full mortgage or refinance. There's a risk here, Stephanie cautioned. If your father refuses to assume the mortgage or can't qualify to refinance on his own, it could impact your credit. But given that he's threatening to involve his lawyers anyway, I'll take that risk, I said, surprising myself with my certainty. After leaving Stephanie's office, I had 3 hours before my scheduled therapy appointment with Dr. Torres. I used that time to visit a nearby cafe and make notes, organizing my thoughts and feelings. For so long, I'd believed I needed to maintain the peace with my father to protect myself financially. Now I was considering a move that would sever one of his primary means of control. The ramifications weren't just financial. This would be a declaration of independence, a statement that I was no longer willing to participate in the dysfunctional dynamics that had defined our family for decades. Dr. Torres had been helping me work through my family issues for the past year. Today's session took on new urgency. I'm proud of you for consulting a lawyer before making any decisions, she said after I recounted the morning's events. That shows you're approaching this thoughtfully rather than reactively. But am I overreacting to the voicemail? Maybe once he calms down. Jessica, let's review the pattern we've discussed. Your father makes a threat, you accommodate him, he temporarily rewards your compliance, then finds a new reason to assert control. What would be different this time? She was right. This wasn't about one voicemail or one Christmas. It was about a lifetime of conditional love and financial manipulation. What about the guilt? I asked. He'll say I'm ungrateful, that I've betrayed the family. Those are powerful words designed to maintain the status quo. But ask yourself, grateful for what? A financial arrangement that's been used repeatedly to control you? And betrayal implies breaking trust. Has he honored your trust in this relationship? By the time our session ended, I felt more resolved, though still anxious about the potential fallout. That evening, Marcus came over with takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant. I'd texted him briefly about the situation but hadn't shared the full details. Now, sitting cross-legged on my living room floor, I told him everything. So you're saying your dad puts your name on a huge loan, threatens you with it for years, then throws a tantrum when you won't bring me home for an interrogation disguised as Christmas dinner? Marcus summarized, his fork paused midway to his mouth. When he put it that way, my father's behavior sounded even more unreasonable. And now you're considering removing yourself from this mortgage, which is what he threatened to do to you anyway, except you'd be doing it on your terms? I nodded. Jess, I've never met your father, but from everything you've told me, he sounds like a bully. And in my experience, the only way to deal with bullies is to stand your ground. It's not that simple, I said. This could blow up my entire family dynamic. Marcus reached across the coffee table to take my hand. From what you've described, maybe that dynamic needs to change. And maybe you're the only one strong enough to make it happen. That night, after Marcus left, I sat on my balcony looking out at the San Francisco skyline. For years, I'd been walking on eggshells, measuring my independence against my father's tolerance. The mortgage had been the ultimate symbol of that imbalance, a financial chain disguised as a gift. I thought about my mother, trapped in a marriage where her financial dependence ensured her compliance. I thought about Ethan, still living in our childhood home, working for a company he had no passion for. And I thought about myself, finally building a life I was proud of, only to have it threatened whenever my father felt challenged. By morning, my decision was made. The process was surprisingly straightforward. Because the property was in New Hampshire, I had to complete the paperwork remotely. Stephanie helped me prepare a quitclaim deed, formally relinquishing my interest in the lake house. For the mortgage, she connected me with a banking colleague who explained that once the quitclaim was filed, I could submit a mortgage responsibility release request. Your father will be notified by the bank, the banking specialist warned. And he'll need to either assume the full mortgage or refinance within 60 days. I understand, I said, signing the final document with a steady hand. The paperwork was submitted electronically on December 23rd. According to the confirmation email, it would be processed within 24 to 48 hours, meaning my father would likely be notified sometime on Christmas Eve. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in years. The next day passed in strange tranquility as I wrapped presents for Marcus and his family, who had invited me for Christmas Eve dinner. I kept expecting my phone to explode with notifications, but there was nothing. It wasn't until I was driving to Marcus's parents' house, a plate of homemade cookies on the passenger seat beside me, that the first missed call notification appeared on my dashboard display. By the time I arrived, there were 10 more. The storm had begun. Marcus's parents lived in a cozy craftsman in Berkeley, the kind of home where houseplants thrived in every window and family photos covered the refrigerator. As I parked in their driveway, my phone vibrated continuously in my purse. I turned it off completely before going inside, determined not to let my family drama overshadow the evening. Diane Wilson greeted me with a warm hug. Marcus is helping his dad with the grill. Come in, I've got mulled wine on the stove. For 3 blessed hours, I was enveloped in the Wilson family's Christmas Eve traditions: grilled salmon and roasted vegetables for dinner, board games by the fireplace, and a walk around the neighborhood to see the holiday lights. No one interrogated me about my career trajectory or made pointed comments about my romantic choices. When Diane asked about my family, I gave a vague answer about them celebrating on the East Coast, and she didn't pry. It wasn't until Marcus was driving me home that I finally turned my phone back on. The notification sounds were so continuous that he pulled over, concerned something was wrong. 37 missed calls, I said, staring at the screen in disbelief. 22 from my father, 8 from my mother, 5 from Ethan, and 2 from numbers I don't recognize. The text messages were even more numerous. Dad, 4:17 p.m., call me immediately. Dad, 4:23 p.m., what have you done? Dad, 4:30 p.m., the bank just called. Fix this now. Mom, 4:45 p.m., Jessica, please call your father, he's very upset. Ethan, 5:01 p.m., WTF, Jess? Dad is losing his mind. Dad, 5:15 p.m., this is completely unacceptable behavior. Call me. Mom, 5:30 p.m., please, Jessica, it's Christmas Eve. Dad, 5:47 p.m., you have 1 hour to call me before I take further action. The messages continued in this vein, growing increasingly desperate as the evening progressed. The most recent was from my father, sent just 20 minutes ago. This childish silence won't work. I've left a message with my lawyer. Expect serious consequences. Marcus looked over at my screen. Are you okay? I was surprised to realize that I was. Despite the flood of messages, I felt oddly calm. I think I am. This is exactly what I expected. Do you want to call them back? I considered this. Not tonight. It's Christmas Eve, and they're all worked up. Nothing productive would come from a conversation right now. Marcus squeezed my hand. You can stay at my place if you don't want to be alone. Thanks, but I think I need to be in my own space tonight. Process everything. Back in my apartment, I silenced my phone, but didn't turn it off, wanting to monitor the situation without being constantly interrupted. The calls and texts continued for another hour before finally tapering off around midnight. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by my Christmas tree, a small but cheerful affair decorated with ornaments I'd collected over the years. For the first time, I allowed myself to really feel the weight of what I'd done. I had taken a definitive step away from my father's control, knowing it would cause exactly this kind of reaction. There was guilt, yes, particularly about my mother and brother who were caught in the crossfire. But underneath that was something unexpected, pride. I had finally stood up for myself in a way that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. I fell asleep on the couch around 1, my phone silent beside me. Christmas morning brought a new wave. I woke to find 12 more missed calls and a voicemail from a man identifying himself as Harold Parker, my father's attorney. His message was professionally worded but carried an unmistakable undertone of panic. "Ms. Morgan, this is Harold Parker from Parker and Associates, representing your father, William Morgan. There appears to have been a serious misunderstanding regarding the New Hampshire property. Your father is very concerned about the paperwork filed with the county clerk. Please call me at your earliest convenience so we can resolve this matter quickly." The misunderstanding language was telling. They hadn't expected me to take action. They'd expected me to cower as I always had before. By noon, the count had reached 68 missed calls. My voicemail was full, and my text message inbox was overflowing with variations on the same themes: shock, anger, demands to call, and increasingly, please. My Aunt Susan, Dad's sister, texted, "Jessica, whatever's going on, please call your parents. Your mother is in tears and it's Christmas." My cousin Michael, "Hey Jess, not sure what's happening but Dad says Uncle Will is having a meltdown about some house thing. Everything okay?" Even my father's longtime assistant Barbara, who had always been kind to me, sent a message. "Jessica, your father is in quite a state. Is there anything I can do to help?" The physical symptoms of stress began to manifest around mid-afternoon. My shoulders tensed, my stomach churned, and a headache formed behind my eyes. Years of conditioning had taught me that my father's displeasure meant danger, and my body was responding accordingly. I called Marcus, needing an anchor. "They're all acting like I've committed some terrible crime," I said, pacing my living room. "Maybe I should have warned them first, or waited until after the holidays." "Jess, stop. Your dad literally canceled Christmas and threatened you with lawyers. You didn't create this situation. You just refused to be victimized by it." "I know, but..." "No buts. You made a decision to protect yourself after years of manipulation. That's not wrong. It's healthy." After we hung up, I made a decision. I would answer one call, but it would be on my terms. I texted my mother, "Mom, I'll call you at 6 p.m. Just you, not Dad. If he gets on the phone, I'm hanging up." Her response was immediate. "Thank you, Jessica. I'll be waiting." At precisely 6, I called. Mom answered on the first ring, her voice thick with what sounded like hours of crying. "Jessica, what's happening?" "Your father is beside himself. The bank called yesterday saying you've removed yourself from the mortgage and the deed. They're saying he needs to refinance or they'll start foreclosure proceedings." I took a deep breath. "Mom, Dad left me a voicemail 2 days ago saying Christmas was canceled and to expect a call from his lawyer about the lake house." I decided to take control of the situation instead of waiting for him to use the mortgage against me again. But sweetheart, he was just upset about the holiday plans. He didn't mean it. He always means it, Mom. Every threat, every ultimatum. He's been using that mortgage to control me for 3 years, and I finally decided I was done. "But it's Christmas," she said, as if the date somehow negated everything else. "Yes, it's Christmas. The Christmas that Dad canceled because I wouldn't subject my boyfriend to his interrogation." I heard muffled voices, then the unmistakable sound of the phone being grabbed. "Jessica." My father's voice was tight with barely controlled rage. "What you've done is completely unacceptable. Do you have any idea the position you've put me in? The bank is demanding I refinance immediately." "I'm aware," I said, surprised by how steady my voice remained. "That's typically what happens when one person on a joint mortgage removes themselves. This is no time for your attitude. You need to call the bank first thing tomorrow and fix this." There's nothing to fix, Dad. I've removed myself from a financial arrangement that you've repeatedly threatened to use against me. You wanted me off the deed? Now I'm off both the deed and the mortgage. This is a family property, Jessica. Your inheritance. No, it's a control mechanism. And I'm done being controlled. I heard him inhale sharply. Harold Parker will be contacting you tomorrow. This isn't over. Actually, it is. I've consulted my own attorney. What I did was completely legal, and there's nothing your lawyer can do about it. You think you're so clever? There are consequences to betraying family, Jessica. Consequences you haven't considered. Like what? Canceling Christmas? Threatening me with lawyers? You've already done those things, Dad. What's left? For perhaps the first time in my life, my father had no immediate response. Jessica, he finally said, his voice lower now, you need to think very carefully about what you're doing. This mortgage situation is more complicated than you realize. I have other investments tied to that property, and there it was. The real issue wasn't about family traditions or respect or even the lake house itself. It was about money. My father had leveraged the property in ways that depended on maintaining the current mortgage arrangement. That sounds like a problem you should discuss with your financial advisor, not your daughter. I heard my mother in the background, pleading with him to calm down. You've ruined Christmas, he said finally, a statement so absurd given the circumstances that I almost laughed. No, Dad. You ruined Christmas when you decided to use it as leverage. I'm simply refusing to play that game anymore. I ended the call and immediately turned my phone off again, knowing there would be an explosion of follow-up calls and texts. The conversation had gone exactly as I'd expected, yet I felt lighter having had it. I'd stood my ground, spoken my truth, and survived. The next morning, December 26th, I received an email from Harold Parker requesting an urgent meeting to discuss the New Hampshire property situation. I forwarded it to Stephanie, who advised me to agree to the meeting but to bring her along. They're hoping you'll be intimidated into reversing course, she said. Having your own legal representation will show them you're serious. The meeting was scheduled for December 27th at Parker's office in the financial district. I took another day off work, feeling this was too important to handle remotely. Parker's office was all dark wood and leather, designed to impress and intimidate. My father was already there when Stephanie and I arrived, sitting beside a thin, gray-haired man I assumed was Harold Parker. Dad looked smaller somehow, his usually commanding presence diminished by genuine worry. Ms. Morgan, thank you for coming, Parker began, his tone conciliatory. I'm hoping we can resolve this unfortunate situation amicably. Stephanie spoke before I could. My client has already resolved the situation by legally removing herself from both the deed and the mortgage, as was her right. We're here merely as a courtesy. Parker glanced at my father before continuing. The timing of this action has created significant difficulties. Mr. Morgan has several financial commitments that depended on the existing mortgage arrangement. Meaning? Stephanie prompted. My father interjected. The lake house equity was leveraged for a business expansion. The bank is now calling in other loans because of the change in mortgage status. Understanding dawned. My father hadn't just been using the mortgage to control me, he'd been using it as collateral for other financial dealings, possibly overextending himself in the process. That's unfortunate, Stephanie said coolly, but not my client's responsibility. Mr. Morgan created this situation by repeatedly threatening to remove Ms. Morgan from the deed while keeping her on the mortgage, which would have left her with all the financial liability and none of the benefits of ownership. I never actually did that, my father protested. But you threatened to, I said, finding my voice. Repeatedly. Every time I didn't comply with your wishes. The lake house was never a gift, it was a leash. Parker attempted to redirect the conversation. Regardless of past discussions, the current situation is untenable. Mr. Morgan needs time to arrange his finances. We're asking for Ms. Morgan to temporarily reinstate her name on the mortgage to allow for an orderly transition. Stephanie shook her head. That's not going to happen. Ms. Morgan has removed herself from a toxic financial entanglement, as is her legal right. If Mr. Morgan needs more time with the bank, that's a conversation he should have with them directly. Jessica, my father said, looking at me directly for the first time. This is going to cause serious problems for the family finances. Your mother's accounts, Ethan's position at the company, everything could be affected. It was a last-ditch attempt to leverage my concern for my mother and brother. In the past, it would have worked. Now, I saw it for what it was, emotional manipulation wrapped in financial threats. Dad, I said, surprised by how calm I felt. For years, you've used money to control everyone around you. Mom stays because she has no financial independence. Ethan works for you because you've made sure he has no other options. You put my name on that mortgage not as a gift, but as a way to keep me in line. I'm done with that dynamic. So you'll just abandon your family? Over one disagreement about Christmas. This isn't about Christmas. It's about years of conditional love and financial manipulation. It's about you threatening me every time I make a choice you don't approve of. It's about you using money as a weapon instead of support. My father's face flushed red. After everything I've given you, this is how you repay me? By causing a financial crisis for the entire family. I didn't cause this crisis, Dad. You did, by overextending yourself financially and using my credit to do it. Whatever problems you're facing now are the result of your choices, not mine. Harold Parker, clearly uncomfortable with the personal turn the conversation had taken, tried to interject with legal technicalities, but it was too late. The true nature of the situation had been exposed. This wasn't about property law, it was about a fundamental shift in family power dynamics. After 30 tense minutes, it became clear that no resolution would be reached. As Stephanie and I stood to leave, my father made one final attempt. Jessica, if you walk out that door, things will never be the same between us. I looked at him, this man who had loomed so large in my life, whose approval I had sought for so long, and felt a surprising wave of compassion beneath my resolve. I hope they won't be, Dad. For all our sakes. The days following the meeting with my father and his lawyer were strangely quiet. The flood of calls and messages slowed to a trickle, then stopped entirely. It was as if the family had retreated to regroup and reassess now that it was clear I wouldn't be backing down. Marcus was my rock during this time. He never pushed for details I wasn't ready to share, but provided a steady, calm presence when the weight of the situation felt overwhelming. Whatever happens with your family, you're not alone, he told me one evening as we walked along the Embarcadero, watching the lights of the Bay Bridge shimmer on the water. I'm here, and I'm proud of how you're handling this. I'd been bracing for the next onslaught, the next attempt at manipulation or control, but it was my mother who broke the silence 5 days after the meeting. Her text was simple, "Can we talk?" Just us. After discussing it with Dr. Torres, I agreed to a phone call, setting clear boundaries in advance. I'm willing to listen, Mom, but I won't reverse my decision about the mortgage. When we spoke, her voice lacked the tearful desperation of our Christmas Day conversation. Instead, she sounded tired, but clearer than I'd heard her in years. Your father isn't handling this well, she began, a masterpiece of understatement. I didn't expect him to, I replied. The financial situation is complicated. The lake house was leveraged against some business loans. The bank is requiring him to provide additional collateral now that the mortgage arrangement has changed. I felt a twinge of guilt, but pushed it aside. That's unfortunate, but it's the result of financial decisions he made. I know. Her response surprised me. That's actually why I wanted to talk to you. This situation has forced me to look more closely at our finances, something your father has always handled exclusively. She paused, and I waited, sensing she needed time to find the right words. Jessica, I don't think things have been managed as well as I was led to believe. There are loans I never knew about, credit lines maxed out. The lake house was just the tip of the iceberg. The revelation wasn't entirely shocking given my father's recent desperation, but hearing it from my mother was. For as long as I could remember, she had defended and rationalized his every decision. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I don't know yet. I've made an appointment with a financial advisor, someone your father doesn't know. I need to understand our true situation before I decide anything." The implications of this small act of independence weren't lost on me. For my mother, seeking financial advice without my father's knowledge or approval was revolutionary. "Mom, that's good. Really good. Your stand made me realize I've been complicit in this dynamic for too long," she said quietly. "I've enabled his control by surrendering mine." We talked for nearly an hour, more openly than we had in years. She didn't ask me to reconsider my decision about the mortgage, and I didn't offer false reassurances about the future of our family relationships. Instead, we occupied a new, more honest space together, uncertain but real. 2 days later, I received a text from Ethan. "Can I call you? Need advice." When I called, he sounded like he hadn't slept in days. "Dad's been on a rampage at the office," he said without preamble. "The lake house thing has turned into a whole financial mess. He's talking about downsizing the company, possibly letting people go." "I'm sorry to hear that, Ethan. That must be stressful for everyone." "It's worse than stressful. He's making decisions out of anger, not business sense. And he's blaming it all on you. Once, this would have devastated me. Now, I recognized it as another attempt to use guilt as leverage. Ethan, Dad is responsible for his own financial decisions. If the company is in trouble because of how he leveraged the lake house, that's on him, not me." "I know that," he said, surprising me. "That's why I'm calling. I've been thinking about what you did, standing up to him like that. It was, I don't know, brave." Coming from Ethan, who had always chosen the path of least resistance with our father, this was significant. "I've been looking at job postings," he continued. "Marketing positions at other companies. My resume isn't great outside of Dad's business, but I have to try. I can't keep living like this." "That's a big step," I said carefully. "What brought this on?" "Watching how Dad reacted to you setting a boundary. It was like seeing behind the curtain, you know? All these years, I thought he was this business genius who had everything under control. Now I'm not so sure." We talked for over an hour, discussing potential career paths, resume strategies, and the emotional complexities of seeking independence from our father. For perhaps the first time, we were connecting as adult siblings rather than as competitors for parental approval. The next major confrontation came, unexpectedly, nearly 2 weeks after the initial mortgage paperwork was filed. I was at work when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. "Jessica Morgan speaking." "Jessica, this is Harold Parker. I apologize for calling you directly, but there's been a development I think you should be aware of." His tone lacked the authoritative confidence of our previous meeting. If anything, he sounded nervous. "What kind of development?" "Your father has been unable to secure alternative financing for the lake house. The bank is initiating foreclosure proceedings." I sat back in my office chair, taking a moment to process this. "I'm sorry to hear that, Mr. Parker, but I don't see how this concerns me anymore. Under normal circumstances, it wouldn't. However, your father has, well, he's not handling this rationally. He's threatening to sue you for what he's calling financial sabotage. I advised strongly against this course of action, but he's insistent. On what grounds could he possibly sue me? I had every legal right to remove myself from that mortgage." Precisely my point. Such a lawsuit would have no merit and would likely be dismissed immediately. It would also be costly and potentially embarrassing for all involved. I'm calling because I hoped you might agree to a meeting, one last attempt to resolve this amicably. The old Jessica would have immediately agreed, desperate to avoid conflict and maintain peace at any cost. The new Jessica recognized this for what it was, my father's desperation manifesting as yet another attempt at control. Mr. Parker, I appreciate your concern, but I've made my position clear. My father created this situation through his financial decisions and his pattern of using money to manipulate family members. If he chooses to pursue a groundless lawsuit, that's his decision. I understand, he said, sounding resigned. For what it's worth, I've tried to make him see reason. This isn't just about the lake house anymore. It's spiraled into something much larger. After the call, I sat staring out my office window at the San Francisco skyline. My father was threatening to sue me, a fact that should have terrified me. Instead, I felt an odd sense of clarity. The threat represented the death throes of his control over me. He had played his final card, and we both knew it was a bluff. I called Stephanie to inform her of the conversation with Parker. She wasn't surprised. This is classic behavior from someone who's used to getting their way through intimidation, she said. When legitimate avenues fail, they escalate to increasingly desperate threats. The good news is that Parker himself seems to recognize the absurdity of it. So what do I do now? Nothing. You've established your boundary. Parker knows the threatened lawsuit has no merit. Either your father will come to his senses, or he'll file and face a swift, expensive dismissal. Either way, you maintain your position. That evening, Marcus suggested we go out to dinner to take my mind off things. We were at a small Italian restaurant in North Beach when my phone lit up with my father's number. I showed it to Marcus. Do you want to take it? He asked. I considered for a moment, then declined the call. Not here, not now. This evening is about us, not him. The voicemail notification appeared moments later. Against my better judgment, I listened while Marcus went to the restroom. My father's voice was different than I'd ever heard it. Gone was the authoritative bluster, the thinly veiled threats. He sounded tired, possibly even slightly slurred. Jessica, it's your father. Harold tells me he spoke with you today. Listen, this situation it's gotten out of hand. The bank well, it's not just the lake house anymore. We need to talk. Not through lawyers. Just us. Call me back. When Marcus returned, I told him about the message. What are you thinking? He asked. I'm thinking that for the first time in my adult life, my father needs something from me more than I need something from him. Are you going to call him back? I took a sip of wine, considering. Yes, but not tonight. And not until I'm absolutely clear about my boundaries. The next day, after another session with Dr. Torres, where we role-played various scenarios, I called my father. He answered immediately. Jessica, thank you for calling back. You said we needed to talk, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Yes. He cleared his throat. The situation with the lake house has complicated other financial arrangements. The bank has questions about some of my business loans. They're reviewing everything. I waited, not offering him an easy out. Parker tells me a lawsuit would be pointless, he continued. And your mother, well, she has opinions about how this has been handled. I could only imagine what form those opinions had taken. My mother's newfound willingness to question my father's decisions was perhaps the most unexpected outcome of this entire situation. What do you want from me, Dad? I need time to sort this out. The bank is pushing for immediate action, but if they knew we were working toward a family resolution. I interrupted. Let me be clear. I'm not putting my name back on that mortgage. Whatever financial restructuring you need to do, you'll need to do without using my credit. Jessica, you don't understand the complexity. I understand perfectly. You leveraged assets, including a property that had my name on it, in ways that have now become problematic. That's not my responsibility to fix. There was a long silence on the line. Then why did you call back? He finally asked, a hint of the old accusatory tone returning. Because despite everything, you're still my father. I don't want to see you in financial ruin. But I won't sacrifice my own financial health or independence to prevent it. Another silence, this one longer. What would it take, he asked eventually, for us to move forward as a family? It was the first time he'd ever asked such a question, the the first acknowledgement that our relationship might require something from him rather than just compliance from me. Respect, I said simply. Recognition that I'm an adult with the right to make my own choices. No more financial entanglements or attempts at control. And if I agree to that, then we can start rebuilding trust slowly. But Dad, these can't just be words. There would need to be real, consistent change in how you interact with me, with Mom, with Ethan. I heard him exhale heavily. I'll think about what you've said, he replied, which wasn't a yes, but wasn't an outright rejection either. It was, perhaps, as much as I could expect for now. The call ended without a clear resolution, but something had shifted. For the first time, we had spoken as adults with independent power rather than as controller and controlled. Whether anything would truly change remained to be seen, but the old dynamic had been irrevocably broken. January brought crisp, clear days to San Francisco and a strange new reality to my family dynamics. The immediate crisis of the lake house mortgage had evolved into a slower, more complex renegotiation of relationships and expectations. Marcus and I had spent New Year's Eve with his family, a celebration marked by genuine warmth and easy laughter. His parents had welcomed me as if I were already part of the family, an inclusion that felt both foreign and deeply comforting after the tension of the previous weeks. "You seem different," Diana had commented as we washed dishes after dinner, the men having been shooed away to set up the board games that were apparently a Wilson family New Year's tradition. "Different how?" I asked. "Lighter. More present." She passed me a serving platter to dry. "When you first came for Christmas Eve, there was a guardedness about you, like you were always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Tonight, you're just here." Her observation caught me off guard with its accuracy. I had spent so many years on high alert, monitoring my words and actions for anything that might trigger my father's disapproval, that the behavior had become automatic. The past 2 weeks had been exhausting and painful, but they had also forced me to claim my own power in a way I never had before. "I think I am different," I admitted. "I'm learning to trust that I can handle whatever comes, even if it's uncomfortable." Diana smiled. "That's no small thing. Some people never learn it." Back at work after the holiday break, I found myself approaching challenges with new confidence. A major client had expressed concerns about our latest campaign, something that would have sent me into a spiral of anxiety months ago. Instead, I led a team meeting to address the issues head-on, presenting alternative approaches without defensiveness or fear. Morgan's got ice in her veins. I overheard one of the junior associates comment admiringly afterward. "Total grace under pressure." If only they knew that my newfound composure had been forged in the crucible of family conflict. The situation with my parents continued to evolve in unexpected ways. My mother had called mid-January with news that stunned me. "I've opened my own bank account," she said, her voice a mixture of pride and nervousness. "Nothing major, just a checking account with some money I've saved from the household budget over the years." For someone who had surrendered all financial autonomy decades ago, this was revolutionary. "Mom, that's wonderful," I said, meaning it. "How does Dad feel about it?" "He doesn't know yet," she admitted. The financial advisor I met with suggested I take some small steps toward independence before having that conversation. I was simultaneously proud of her and concerned about my father's reaction when he inevitably found out. "What made you decide to do this now?" She was quiet for a moment. "Watching you stand your ground made me realize how much I've given up over the years. Not just financially, but in every way that matters. I don't want to leave your father, but I need to find myself again before it's too late." My mother's journey toward reclaiming her identity had only just begun, but the fact that it had started at all felt miraculous. Ethan's transformation was happening in parallel. He had applied for several marketing positions at companies unconnected to our father and had been granted 2 interviews so far. "Dad's furious that I'm even looking," he told me during one of our now regular phone calls. "But the company really is in trouble, Jess. He overleveraged everything, not just the lake house." If he doesn't get things under control, there might not be a job for me there anyway. How do you feel about that possibility? I asked, terrified, relieved, both. He laughed without humor. I've spent my entire adult life avoiding making my own decisions. Now I don't have a choice. My father remained the most resistant to change, as I had expected. After our conversation about a family resolution, he had retreated into a sullen silence for nearly 2 weeks. Then, unexpectedly, he had emailed me a brief business-like message. The lake house situation has been resolved. I've secured alternative financing. Your name has been fully removed from all associated documentation. William Morgan. No apology, no acknowledgement of the chaos he had created, but also no further threats or attempts to manipulate me back into the old patterns. It was as close to acceptance as I was likely to get, at least for now. My own healing journey continued with weekly sessions with Dr. Torres, who helped me navigate the complex emotions that surfaced as family dynamics shifted. What you're experiencing is very common when someone changes a long-standing pattern in a dysfunctional family system, she explained during one particularly intense session. Everyone has played their assigned roles for so long that when one person steps out of that role, it forces everyone else to adjust. That adjustment is rarely smooth. I feel guilty sometimes, I admitted. Like I've blown up the family by standing my ground. The family was already dysfunctional, Jessica. You just refuse to keep participating in that dysfunction. There's a difference between causing a problem and exposing a problem that was already there. This distinction helped me process the ongoing fallout without taking on inappropriate responsibility for others' reactions. The financial freedom I had gained by removing myself from the lake house situation had unexpected psychological benefits. Without the constant low-grade anxiety about my father potentially weaponizing the mortgage against me, I found myself making bolder choices in other areas of my life. I applied for a small business loan to launch a side project I'd been conceptualizing for years, a consultancy focused on helping sustainable brands target conscious consumers. The approval came through in February, and I began developing the business plan on weekends and evenings. My relationship with Marcus deepened through it all. He had seen me at my most vulnerable, witnessed the messy reality of my family dynamics, and remained steadfastly supportive without trying to rescue or fix things for me. I'm thinking about looking for a bigger apartment, I told him one evening as we walked his dog along Ocean Beach. Something with office space for the consultancy. He was quiet for a moment, then said, or we could look for a place together. If that's something you might want. The old Jessica would have immediately worried about what my father would think of such a move. The new Jessica simply considered whether it was what I wanted. I think I'd like that, I said, squeezing his hand. But let's take our time finding the right place. The ripple effects of my stand extended beyond my immediate family. 2 of my friends, inspired by my experience, had taken steps to address toxic situations in their own lives. Amanda had finally quit the job where her boss had been verbally abusive for years, and Tara had established firm boundaries with her manipulative sister. You made me realize I didn't have to keep accepting behavior that made me miserable, Tara told me over coffee. If you could stand up to your father after all these years, I could certainly tell my sister that her drama isn't welcome in my life anymore. By March, some of the acute tension had begun to subside. My father had managed to stabilize his financial situation, though from what Ethan reported, he had been forced to sell several investment properties and scale back some of his business operations. A tentative new normal began to emerge. My mother called weekly. Our conversations increasingly centered on her rediscovery of old interests and friendships rather than family drama. Ethan had accepted a position with a mid-sized marketing firm in Cambridge, taking a pay cut but gaining independence from our father's company. My father and I maintained a careful distance, communicating primarily through brief, factual emails about necessary family matters. I had no illusions that he had undergone some miraculous transformation or that we would ever have the warm, supportive relationship I had always craved. But the toxic pattern of financial control and emotional manipulation had been broken, and that itself was a victory worth celebrating. In April, I returned to Boston for Ethan's birthday, my first visit home since the Christmas that never was. I stayed in a hotel rather than my parents' house, a choice that would have been unthinkable months earlier, but now felt essential to maintaining my boundaries. Dinner with the family was tense but civil. My father was subdued, his customary dominance of the conversation notably absent. My mother, by contrast, seemed more engaged and animated than I had seen her in years, eagerly sharing stories about a watercolor class she had started taking. Ethan pulled me aside after dinner. "It's weird, right? Like we're in some alternate universe where mom talks and dad listens. Good weird or bad weird?" I asked. He considered. Different weird, but probably good in the long run. As I prepared to return to San Francisco, my mother hugged me tightly at the hotel entrance. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For showing me it was possible to change things." I spent so many years believing I had no choice. I held her for a long moment, this woman who had both enabled my father's control and been victimized by it, feeling a complex mixture of love, forgiveness, and hope for her journey ahead. Marcus was waiting at the airport when I landed, his familiar smile a welcome sight after the emotional complexity of the visit home. "How was it?" he asked as we walked to the parking garage. "Complicated. Exhausting. Better than I expected in some ways, harder in others." "That sounds about right for family." As we drove toward the city, the Golden Gate Bridge appeared in the distance, its iconic span illuminated against the evening sky. I thought about bridges, about connections that withstand tension and pressure, about the space they create between separate lands while simultaneously joining them. "I think I'm ready to look for that place together," I said, reaching for his hand. "Something with lots of light." 6 months after that fateful Christmas voicemail, my life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined. Marcus and I had found a sun-filled apartment in No Valley with a small second bedroom perfect for my growing consultancy business. My marketing director position continued to challenge and fulfill me, while my side business had already secured 3 clients. The most significant change, however, was internal. The constant background anxiety that had been my lifelong companion had receded, replaced by a steady confidence in my own judgment and resilience. I had faced my greatest fear, standing up to my father and weathering the subsequent storm, and had not only survived, but emerged stronger. My father's grudging acknowledgement of my independence had come in an unexpected form. When I closed on my first real estate purchase, a small investment property in Oakland, he had sent a brief email, "Congratulations on your property acquisition. The neighborhood has solid appreciation potential. William Morgan." Coming from him, this was practically effusive praise. He hadn't offered advice or criticism, just recognition of my achievement. It wasn't warmth, but it was respect, and that represented significant progress. My mother's journey toward independence continued in small but meaningful steps. She had expanded her separate bank account and had recently mentioned considering part-time work, perhaps teaching art to children. After decades of defining herself solely as William Morgan's wife, she was cautiously exploring her own identity again. "I've been thinking about what you said," she told me during one of our weekly calls, "about how it's never too late to change direction. I won't ever be completely independent like you, Jessica. That's not what I want. But I need something that's just mine." "I think that's wonderful, Mom. You were an art teacher before you married Dad, right? I bet you were amazing at it." "I was," she said, with unusual certainty. "I really was." Ethan's transformation had been perhaps the most dramatic. After 6 months at his new marketing job, he had been promoted to team lead. More importantly, he had started therapy, working through the complex dynamics of growing up under our father's thumb. "The therapist says I have approval addiction," he told me, half-jokingly. "Apparently spending your whole life trying to please an unpleasable father will do that to you." Tell me about it, I laughed. How's the new apartment working out? Small, but mine. Dad keeps sending me real estate listings for better neighborhoods, but I just thank him and ignore them. Baby steps, right? My own healing journey continued with regular therapy sessions. Dr. Torres had helped me understand that while I couldn't change my father or erase the past, I could choose how I engaged with him moving forward. Boundaries aren't about controlling other people's behavior, she reminded me. They're about clarifying what you will and won't accept in your life. Your father may never fully understand or respect your boundaries, but you can still maintain them. I had put this philosophy into practice when my parents visited San Francisco in May. Rather than the extended stay my mother had initially proposed, I had suggested a 3-day visit with clear parameters. They would stay in a hotel, we would meet for scheduled activities, and any discussion of finances or attempts to re-establish old patterns would result in the immediate end of the visit. To my surprise, they had accepted these terms without argument. The visit had been awkward at times, but largely pleasant, with my father making visible efforts to restrain his usual controlling behaviors. Watching him meet Marcus and interact with him as an equal rather than a subject for interrogation had been both strange and gratifying. Financial independence had proven to be the foundation upon which all other forms of independence were built. Without the threat of economic retaliation hanging over my head, I was free to make choices based on my own values and desires rather than fear of punishment or withdrawal of support. This realization had inspired me to start a monthly financial literacy workshop for women at a local community center. Many of the participants were in situations similar to my mother's, financially dependent on partners who controlled all household decisions. Knowledge is power, I told them in our first session. You don't have to make dramatic changes overnight, but understanding your financial situation is the first step toward having choices. The workshops had quickly become one of the most rewarding aspects of my life, a way of transforming my painful experiences into something that could help others. My relationship with Marcus had deepened through all these changes. He had seen me at my most vulnerable and my most determined, and his love and support had never wavered. We had begun tentative discussions about longer-term plans, a future that I could now envision without the shadow of my father's disapproval darkening every decision. Have you thought about inviting your parents to dinner when they visit next month? Marcus asked one evening as we prepared dinner in our new kitchen. My parents will be in town that weekend too. The thought of both sets of parents at the same table would have sent me into a panic attack 6 months ago. Now, I considered it carefully. Maybe lunch instead of dinner, I suggested. Shorter time frame. Less pressure. Good thinking. We can always extend it if things are going well. Building a chosen family with Marcus and our friends had been another unexpected gift of this journey. I had always viewed family as a fixed, unchangeable entity, defined by blood and obligation rather than choice and mutual respect. Now I understood that family could be something you created actively, a network of relationships based on genuine care rather than control or duty. As summer turned to fall, I reflected on how much had changed since that December voicemail. The crisis that had seemed so devastating at the time had actually been the catalyst for growth and healing that might never have happened otherwise. That voicemail had become a pivotal moment in my life story, the point at which I had finally recognized my own power and worth. My father's attempt to control me through financial threats had backfired spectacularly, freeing me not just from the mortgage obligation, but from the psychological chains that had bound me for decades. The greatest gift I had given myself wasn't financial independence, though that was significant. It was the permission to live on my own terms, to define success by my own standards rather than my father's, to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than power and control. As I finish sharing this story with you, I wonder about your own experiences with family dynamics and financial control. Have you ever had to make a difficult stand to protect your independence? What boundaries have you established in your relationships? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking and subscribing to my channel for more reflections on breaking free from toxic patterns and building a life of authentic joy. And if you know someone who might benefit from hearing this journey, sharing could be your gift to them. Thank you for witnessing my story, and remember, sometimes the greatest act of love is the one you offer yourself.